The taxi idled outside my Atlanta apartment building. Its yellow gleam of familiar promise of onward movement. My suitcase sat by the door, perfectly packed. My briefcase, holding the culmination of months of work, rested on the kitchen counter. My phone, charged and ready, buzzed with a final confirmation from my flight. Chicago. A huge pitch. The biggest of my career as a financial planner at just 28. This was it. My moment. Then my phone rang. Mom. Morgan. It's Grandpa. Her voice was a ragged whisper laced with a panic I rarely heard. He's had a bad fall. A really bad one. He's asking for you. My blood ran cold. Grandpa. He was the anchor of our family. The only one who truly saw me. A bad fall could mean anything at his age. My mind immediately conjured images of him frail, alone, needing me. What happened? Is he okay? Where is he? The questions tumbled out. Urgent. Unthinking. Just come. Please. Morgan. You need to come now. Her voice broke. The pitch. The flight. The months of preparation. It all vanished. Grandpa needed me. There was no other thought. I'm coming. Mom. I'm on my way. I hung up. Heart hammering. I called the taxi back. Told them to wait. A frantic call to my assistant. Canceling the flight. Rescheduling the pitch. Explanations were brief. Vague. Family emergency. Grandpa. They understood. They had to. I raced through the door, throwing my suitcase into the back of the waiting cab. The drive, usually a blur of city lights, felt endless. Every red light was a torment. Every turn of the wheel too slow. I called Mom back. No answer. Called Dad. No answer. Ethan. My brother. No answer. A fresh wave of dread washed over me. What if it was worse than Mom let on? What if I was too late? Finally. The familiar street. Our family home. A grand old house that always felt a little too big for the three of us who lived there. I burst through the front door, not bothering to knock. My voice choked with fear. Mom. Dad. Grandpa. I'm here. Where is he? Silence. The house was quiet. Almost eerily so. The usual afternoon sounds were absent. No TV. No distant music. No clatter from the kitchen. Then, from the living room, a rustle. I peered around the corner. There, in his favorite armchair, sat Grandpa. He was perfectly healthy. He was wearing his reading glasses. A newspaper spread wide in his lap. A half-eaten plate of cookies sat on the side table next to him, and a cup of tea sent wisps of steam into the air. He looked up, a slight frown on his face. Morgan. What on earth are you doing here? Dear, you were supposed to be flying to Chicago today. Weren't you? He asked. His voice calm. Clear. utterly free of any sign of recent trauma. My breath hitched. The world tilted. The panic. The urgency. The canceled flight. The abandoned pitch. It all slammed into me. It wasn't real. None of it. Mom had lied. My eyes swept the room. No, Mom. No, Dad. No, Ethan. Just Grandpa looking perfectly fine. The realization hit me like a physical blow. A cold, hard knot formed in my stomach. But why? Why would she do this? Why would she use Grandpa's health? His well-being as a weapon to stop me from going to Chicago? The question echoed in the sudden, deafening silence of the living room. A silence that now felt less peaceful and more like the calm before a storm. My throat tightened. The air felt thick, heavy with unspoken things. Grandpa watched me, his kind eyes clouded with something I couldn't quite place. Regret. Shame. He knew he had to. My mind raced back not just to this morning, but to every morning, every year, every birthday, every slight. This wasn't a sudden, isolated incident. This was a pattern, a deep-seated rot that had always been there just beneath the surface. Growing up, I was the shadow. Ethan, my younger brother by 3 years, was the sun. Everything revolved around him. From the moment he was born, a tiny squalling bundle, he became the center of our universe. My parents, Claire and David Anderson, never explicitly said it, but their actions screamed it. Ethan was special. I was just me. I remember my 9th birthday. I wanted a chemistry set, a real one with beers and bubbling liquids. I had talked about it for months. My parents nodded, smiled, made vague promises. On my birthday, I got a new set of encyclopedias. Educational, they said. Good for my future. Ethan, that same year, got a remote control car that cost more than all my birthday presents combined. It was a race car, sleek and fast, that he immediately crashed into the wall. My parents laughed. Boys will be boys. Dad chuckled, already looking up parts to fix it. I sat in my room tracing the letters in astronomy, feeling a dull ache of disappointment. It wasn't about the gift. Not really. It was about the difference in their reactions, the effortless joy for him, the dutiful acknowledgement for me. As we got older, the favoritism only sharpened, becoming more blatant, more painful. Ethan breezed through high school, barely cracking a book. Yet, he always had the newest gadgets, the coolest clothes. When he wanted to go to a specific expensive university, my parents mortgaged a part of the house without a second thought. He needs this opportunity, Mom would say, her eyes shining with pride. He's got so much potential. When it was my turn, I got into an equally prestigious but more affordable state university on a partial scholarship. My parents congratulated me, of course, but it felt hollow. That's wonderful, dear, Dad said, already turning back to Ethan's latest academic. drama, which involved a missing textbook and a vague accusation of plagiarism that Mom somehow smoothed over. My remaining tuition, my living expenses, they were my responsibility to manage wisely. Ethan had a lavish dorm room, a new car for campus, and a generous allowance. I worked 2 jobs, studied late into the night, and ate ramen more often than I cared to admit. Different kids, different needs, Mom would often say, a saccharine smile on her face whenever I dared to ask for something. Anything that approached the level of generosity Ethan received. Ethan is more creative. He needs financial freedom to explore his passions. My passion for finance, my relentless drive to succeed, my straight A's. These were simply expected, not rewarded, not nurtured in the same way. My needs, it seemed, were to be self-sufficient. Ethan's needs were to be indulged. There was the time Ethan decided he wanted to be an entrepreneur. He had an amazing idea for an app, which mostly involved ordering expensive coffee directly to your desk. My parents immediately poured $50,000 into his startup, giving him an apartment downtown to incubate his ideas. The app never launched. The money vanished. My parents shrugged. He learned a valuable lesson, Mom declared. I had to save for years just to afford the down payment on my small condo. Through it all, I learned to expect nothing, to become self-reliant, to suppress the ache of unfairness that gnawed at me. I channeled my hurt into ambition, into work, into proving my worth through achievements they couldn't ignore. I became an ambitious financial planner, rising quickly, building a solid reputation. I needed to build my own future because it was clear my family wouldn't. Only one person saw it. Only one person ever truly saw me. Grandpa William. He would slip me $20 bills when I was little. A secret handshake. A wink. For a little treat just for you. Morgy bug. He'd listen patiently to my plans, my dreams, my frustrations. He'd come to my recital, my science fairs, my graduation. Often the only family member there, apart from a perfunctory appearance from my parents. Your parents? They love you. Dear, he'd say gently, watching me with knowing eyes over a cup of tea. But they have a blind spot when it comes to Ethan. Don't let it make you bitter. Let it make you stronger. He'd tap my arm. You're sharper than they know. You're more resilient than they realize. You're stronger than they'll ever admit. His words were my lifeline. His unwavering belief in me was the only thing that kept the creeping doubt at bay. He was my rock, my confidant, my only ally in a family that seemed determined to erase me. He was the one who taught me about our family's history, about the Anderson hotels, about the legacy that my parents seemed intent on squandering on Ethan. He always spoke about fairness, about integrity, about upholding the family name with honor. So when Mom called, feigning a crisis with him, it wasn't just a lie. It was a violation. It wasn't just deceit. It was a weaponization of the only genuine love I felt within that family. It was a betrayal so profound it threatened to unravel everything I thought I knew about where I stood. even in the margins, even as the invisible daughter. The cold knot in my stomach solidified into a hard, sharp shard of anger. This wasn't just about a canceled flight anymore. This was about a lifetime of being overlooked, culminating in this calculated, cruel deception using the one person who mattered. Grandpa William cleared his throat. A soft, almost imperceptible sound that broke the heavy silence. He folded his newspaper with deliberate slowness, his gaze fixed on me. His eyes, usually sparkling with wit and warmth, were now filled with a deep sorrow. It was the look of a man carrying a burden he wished he didn't have to. "Morgan, my dear," he began, his voice raspy. "I owe you an apology." My heart pounded. I hadn't realized how much I needed to hear it, even if it wasn't coming from the person who truly orchestrated the deception. I just stared at him, my own voice stuck in my throat. A lump of betrayal and confusion lodged there. "Your mother," he continued, his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. "She called me this morning. Told me she was going to call you. Said she needed me to corroborate a story." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Said she needed to keep you from going to Chicago," he confessed. Just like that. No pretense. No excuses. Just the stark, painful truth. Mom had asked him to lie. She had used his love for me, his concern as a prop in her elaborate deception. The person who always reminded me to be strong, to see the truth, had been coerced into a lie for their benefit. "Why? Grandpa?" I finally managed to whisper, the words barely audible. "Why would she do this?" He shook his head slowly, the sadness in his eyes deepening. "She didn't tell me why. Not exactly. Just that it was important for Ethan's future, and that you wouldn't understand. I should have refused. Morgan, I should have." He looked genuinely remorseful, his hands trembling slightly as he set the newspaper on the coffee table. As he spoke, my phone, which I'd forgotten I was even holding, buzzed. A notification. Instagram. It was Ethan. He just posted something. Usually, I ignored his endless stream of self-congratulatory photos, but something urged me to open it. Maybe it was the sudden sharp suspicion that grandfather's words had planted in my mind. I tapped the icon. The app loaded. My breath hitched. The first photo was a selfie of Ethan grinning widely, sunglasses perched on his head. Behind him, turquoise water lapped gently against a pristine white sand beach. Palm trees swayed in the background. The caption read, "Paradise found. Bahamas bound with the fam. Number island life. Number family vacay. Number nowaries." I scrolled. The next photo. Mom and Dad, arm in arm, laughing, drinks with tiny umbrellas in their hands. They were clearly on a resort balcony overlooking the ocean. Mom's hair was tied back in a silk scarf, sunglasses hiding her eyes. Dad was wearing a ridiculously expensive-looking Hawaiian shirt. They looked carefree, happy, utterly oblivious to the chaos they just caused in my life. Another photo. Ethan splashing in the ocean. A jet ski visible in the distance. And then a group shot. All three of them. Ethan. Mom and Dad. Grinning. Tanned. Looking like they didn't have a care in the world. My entire family vacationing in the Bahamas without me. The caption confirmed it. Just landed in Nassau. Soaking up the sun with the best crew. The timestamp was from earlier that morning. Not just a planned trip, but one they were already on. The anger that had been simmering beneath the surface erupted. A scorching wave of fury that wiped away all other emotions. My vision blurred for a moment. The vibrant blues of the Instagram photos burning into my retina. They hadn't just lied to me. They hadn't just used Grandpa. They had actively, deliberately exiled me. They had used Grandpa's supposed fall as a smokescreen. A cruel distraction to ensure I was stuck in Atlanta. Probably worrying myself sick while they were living it up. Sipping cocktails on a beach somewhere. The betrayal burned hotter than any disappointment I had ever felt before. This wasn't just about Ethan getting more. This wasn't just about me being ignored. This was about a calculated, malicious act designed to hurt me, to keep me out of their lives, to make me feel utterly alone and insignificant. They had used the one person I trusted, the one person who loved me unconditionally to orchestrate their scheme. It was a level of cruelty I hadn't imagined even they were capable of. My hands started to shake. I could feel the tremor spreading through my body. Grandpa reached out a hand, his face etched with concern. But I barely registered it. My gaze was fixed on the screen, on the smiling faces of the family that had just shredded my trust into tiny, irreparable pieces. They're in the Bahamas. I whispered, my voice flat, devoid of emotion. I turned the phone to show Grandpa the photos, the incriminating evidence. He looked at the screen, his face hardening with each image. The sadness in his eyes was replaced by a steely resolve. He looked from the phone to me, his jaw clenching. He didn't say anything, but his silence spoke volumes. It was a shared understanding, a quiet recognition of a profound injustice. The pain was immense, but beneath it, a new feeling was taking root. A cold, hard resolve. They had used Grandpa's name to exile me. They had stolen my morning, my pitch, my peace of mind. They had done it with smiles on their faces thousands of miles away. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't just hurt. I was furious. And that fury, unlike the usual ache of neglect, felt sharp, empowering. It felt like it demanded action. Grandpa William took a deep, shuddering breath. His eyes still fixed on the Instagram photos of my smiling, vacationing family. The hurt on my face must have been mirrored on his. He reached over and gently took my hand. His grip surprisingly firm. "Morgan," he said. His voice quiet but steady. "There's something else you need to see." He slowly rose from his armchair, moving with the familiar deliberateness of an older man, and walked over to a small antique wooden desk in the corner of the living room. It was always a place where he kept his papers, his bills, the occasional crossword puzzle. I watched him, numb, the images of the Bahamas still flashing behind my eyes. What else could there be? What could possibly be worse than this calculated personal betrayal? He opened a locked drawer with a small brass key he kept on his keyring, retrieved a worn leather-bound folder, and placed it on the coffee table between us. The folder was thick, its edges softened by years of handling. It smelled faintly of old paper and dust. My name, Morgan, was neatly inscribed on the tab in his careful, elegant handwriting. My heart began to race again. A different kind of anxiety now. A colder fear. What was in there? I've been keeping this, he said, pushing the folder towards me. For a long time. I always hoped I wouldn't have to show it to you. But after today, after what they've done, you deserve to know the truth. All of it. My fingers trembled as I reached for the folder. The leather felt cool against my skin. I opened it slowly. Inside, neatly organized by year, were stacks of documents. Bank statements, trust reports, legal correspondence, account summaries. A chilling sense of dread settled over me. Your grandmother, bless her soul, Grandpa began, his voice soft. She created a trust for you and Ethan when you were very young. A substantial one. $5 million total. To be split equally when you both turned 25, $2.5 million each. It was meant to be your inheritance, your future security. She always believed in setting her grandchildren up for success independently. My eyes scanned the first few pages. My name, the trust fund, the initial balance. It was all there, clear as day. My $2.5 million sitting in an account waiting for me. I remembered Grandma talking about it vaguely when I was a teenager. I hadn't paid much attention then, thinking it was something far off in the future, a distant promise. But as I flipped through the subsequent pages, the numbers began to change. Withdrawals. Large, consistent withdrawals. Not by me. Not by Ethan. The beneficiaries listed were often my parents. Or more subtly, transactions funneled through other accounts linked to them. The shock hit me hard. It wasn't just neglect. It wasn't just favoritism. It was theft. I started noticing irregularities when you turned 25, Grandpa continued, his voice heavy. Large sums disappearing. When I questioned your mother, she had excuses. Investment opportunities for Ethan. Helping Ethan get his feet off the ground. Temporary loans. I kept asking for proof. For repayments. They never came. The explanations grew thinner. The excuses more elaborate. My eyes darted across the documents, trying to make sense of the dizzying array of figures. There, in black and white, was the evidence of my stolen future. A transfer of $300,000 to Ethan Anderson Business Ventures, LLC. Clearly. The infamous coffee app startup. A payment of $150,000 to university tuition. Ethan Anderson. For out-of-state fees and a lavish living stipend. Multiple wire transfers for luxury automobile lease. Ethan Anderson. A deed for a condominium purchase. Ethan Anderson. Not his little apartment, but a condominium. Every car. Every tuition payment. Every apartment. Every failed startup Ethan had ever flaunted. It was all paid for with my inheritance. My $2.5 million share of the $5 million trust fund wasn't gone. It had simply been rerouted, systematically siphoned off, and rebranded as Ethan's opportunities. The blood drained from my face. My hands, still holding the folder, began to shake uncontrollably. This wasn't just emotional neglect. This wasn't just a pattern of favoritism. This was a calculated, deliberate act of financial abuse. They hadn't just ignored me. They had actively stripped me of my future, of the foundation my grandmother had so carefully laid for me. My throat burned. A wave of nausea washed over me. I felt physically ill. My parents, the people who were supposed to protect me, to guide me, had plundered my birthright to fuel Ethan's endless desires. They had used me as a personal bank, an invisible piggy bank they could smash open whenever Ethan needed another expensive toy or another failed venture. I looked up at Grandpa, tears stinging my eyes. Grandpa, how could they? The words were barely a whisper, ragged with disbelief and profound hurt. How could they do this? He looked at me with immense compassion. Greed, I suppose, mixed with a misguided sense of parental duty towards Ethan. They always thought he needed more help, more of a push. They convinced themselves it was a loan, that they'd make it right. But they never did. He sighed. A deep, weary sound. I kept these records, Morgan, because I knew one day you'd need them. I tried to reason with them, but they just dismissed me. Said I was old-fashioned and didn't understand modern finance. But I understood fraud. The weight of the folder in my hands felt crushing. Yet, it also held a strange, unsettling power. This wasn't just my story of being overlooked. This was a story of criminal betrayal, of outright theft. The Bahamas photos, the fake emergency. They suddenly clicked into place. Pieces of a much larger, more sinister puzzle. They weren't just neglecting me. They were actively robbing me. They had created a narrative where Ethan was the golden child, deserving of everything, while I was simply a resource to be exploited silently, out of sight. The depth of their deception was staggering. It wasn't just money. It was trust. It was my sense of security. It was the belief that no matter how much they favored Ethan, they would never actively harm me. But they had. They had taken my future and handed it to my brother piece by piece. Under a veil of normally and parental love, a cold, hard fury began to replace the nausea and tears. It was a clear, steady anger. They had stolen $2.5 million from me. They had done it systematically over years, and they were still celebrating, still living their privileged lives while I sat here, my world crumbling around me. This wasn't just a family drama anymore. This was a crime. And I suddenly knew with chilling certainty that I couldn't let them get away with it. My mind reeled. The sheer volume of evidence in that folder was overwhelming. Each bank statement, each trust report, each meticulously highlighted transfer screamed betrayal. $2 and $5 million gone. Not just spent, but stolen. Funneled into Ethan's extravagant, underachieving life. My family hadn't just ignored me. They had systematically dismantled my future. I closed the folder, my fingers tracing the faded Morgan on the tab. My eyes met Grandpa's. And for the first time, I felt a connection of shared outrage, a deep understanding that transcended words. He had known, and he had tried in his own quiet way to protect me by documenting their deceit. What? What do I do? Grandpa? I finally managed to ask, my voice hoarse. It was a question born of shock of a lifetime of being told to accept my lot. But even as I asked it, a defiant spark ignited within me. This wasn't something I could simply accept. There's someone who can help, he said, his voice firm, shedding the earlier remorse. My daughter, your Aunt Elizabeth. She's a corporate lawyer, a sharp one. She and your mother, they haven't spoken in years. Bad blood over some business dealings with the family hotel chain, Anderson Hotels, years ago. Elizabeth always suspected your parents were less than ethical in their management. Aunt Elizabeth. I barely remembered her. A distant relative. A name whispered in hushed tones by my parents, usually followed by a dismissive, "She's too ambitious for her own good." Or, "She thinks she knows everything." She had been a ghost in our family, intentionally estranged, an inconvenient truth that my parents preferred to ignore. But Grandpa's description, sharp corporate lawyer, resonated with a sudden, urgent hope. Do you have her number? I asked, my voice gaining a new edge of determination. Grandpa nodded, pulling out a small, well-worn address book from his pocket. He scribbled a number on a notepad along with a warning. She's tough. Morgan. But she's fair. And she hates injustice. I called Elizabeth immediately, my hands still shaking, but now with a different kind of energy. The phone rang 3 times before a crisp, professional voice answered. Elizabeth Kingston. How may I help you? Aunt Elizabeth. It's Morgan. Morgan Anderson, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. Grandpa William gave me your number. I have something I need to talk to you about. It's about Mom and Dad and the trust fund. There was a moment of silence on the other end. A pause that felt loaded. Then Elizabeth's voice. A little less professional. A little more intrigued. Morgan? Well, that's a name I haven't heard in a long time. William mentioned you were the sensible one. The quiet observer. He called you. A trust fund. You say your parents. This sounds interesting. Can you come to my office? Say tomorrow morning. Yes. Absolutely. I'll be there. The next morning, I walked into Aunt Elizabeth's sleek, modern law office in downtown Atlanta. The space was all glass and steel, minimalist and efficient. A stark contrast to the old money opulence of my parents' home. Elizabeth herself was as sharp as her office, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit. Her silver hair pulled back in a severe bun. Her eyes bright and intelligent, scrutinizing me as I walked in. She was older than my mother, perhaps early 60s, but radiated an energy that belied her age. I laid the folder on her polished conference table. As I spoke, the words flowed, fueled by years of suppressed hurt and the raw anger of recent revelations. I recounted the fake emergency, the Bahamas trip, the discovery of the pilfered trust fund. Every single detail. Elizabeth listened without interruption, her expression unreadable, occasionally nodding or making a brief note. When I finished, the silence in the room was profound. Elizabeth picked up the folder, opened it, and began to methodically review each document. Her eyes moved quickly over the bank statements, the trust agreements, the transfer records. She spent a long time on the original trust deed, then on the records showing the systematic withdrawals. "This," she said finally, her voice low and even, "is textbook fraud. Morgan. Embezzlement. Plain and simple. They've been systematically siphoning your inheritance for years, right under your nose and the nose of the trustee, who appears to have been remarkably complicit. Or willfully negligent." She tapped a finger on one of the transfer records. "These aren't loans. These are illegal diversions of funds from a protected trust." My stomach clenched. Hearing it from a lawyer, hearing the cold legal terminology made it even more real, more terrifying, but also strangely more validating. Then she dropped another bomb. "And it gets worse," Elizabeth continued, her gaze direct, unwavering. "I've been keeping an eye on Anderson Hotels. Your father recently initiated a process to transfer full ownership of the entire chain to Ethan. He's been restructuring the company, creating new bylaws, essentially cutting out any other potential beneficiaries, especially you. It seems they're preparing to hand him the keys to the entire empire, unencumbered." My breath hitched. The Anderson Hotels, the legacy Grandpa had always spoken about with such pride, the family business built by my great-grandfather. They weren't just stealing my money. They were attempting to steal my birthright, my connection to the family's heritage, and hand it over to Ethan, the very person who had benefited from their fraud. Ethan, who couldn't manage a coffee app, was about to inherit an entire hotel chain. "They're not just taking your personal inheritance, Morgan," Elizabeth explained, leaning forward. "They're attempting to erase you from the family business, from its future. This transfer means you'd have no claim, no stake, nothing. Ethan would be the sole heir to everything." The betrayal burned a new wan, but this time it was a colder, more calculated flame. It wasn't just about Mom and Dad making bad choices. This was about a deliberate, multi-pronged attack on my very existence within the family, on my financial and familial identity. "But how can they do that?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Isn't there anything to stop them?" Elizabeth gave me a small, tight smile. "Oh, Morgan, there's always something, especially when greed and dishonesty are involved. Your grandmother, bless her wise heart, was a meticulous woman. She wrote the original Anderson Hotel's founding contract with a few very specific clauses. Clauses your parents, in their rush to secure Ethan's future, may have conveniently forgotten or hoped no one would ever challenge. She picked up the folder again, weighing it in her hand. You have proof, Morgan. Solid, undeniable proof of fraud. Not just against you personally, but against the principles of fairness and ethical conduct that the Anderson name was built upon. This isn't just a family squabble anymore. This is a battle for justice for what is rightfully yours. And with this, she tapped the folder. We have the firepower to fight back. The fear began to recede, replaced by a surge of resolve. Aunt Elizabeth's calm, confident demeanor was infectious. For the first time, I felt a flicker of hope. Not for reconciliation, but for retribution. They had pushed me, overlooked me, stolen from me. Now, with Aunt Elizabeth by my side, armed with Grandpa's folder of proof, it was time to push back. Aunt Elizabeth's words, "This is a battle for justice," echoed in my ears, cutting through the fog of betrayal and hurt. She was right. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about principle, about integrity, about holding people accountable for their deceit. The fear I had felt slowly receded, replaced by a fierce, cold resolve. What's the plan? I asked, my voice steady, feeling a strength I hadn't known I possessed. Elizabeth leaned back, a glint in her intelligent eyes. We hit them where it hurts the most. Morgan. Their reputation. Your parents, especially your father, pride themselves on their spotless public image, their pillar of the community facade. They can handle a private lawsuit, perhaps even try to settle it quietly. But public humiliation, exposure of their fraud and favoritism, that's a blow they won't recover from easily, especially with the Anderson Hotel's legacy at stake. She paused, watching my reaction. And you, Morgan, have the most powerful tool at your disposal in this modern age. Social media. It's direct. It's instant. And it reaches far beyond the small circles of lawyers and courtrooms. My stomach clenched at the thought. Publicly exposing my family. It felt drastic, unthinkable just days ago. But then I pictured Ethan's smug face in the Bahamas, my parents laughing, sipping cocktails while Grandpa and I sat in silence, holding the evidence of their theft. The image solidified my resolve. They didn't care about me. Why should I care about their image? Grandpa William, who had listened intently, nodded slowly. Elizabeth is right. Morgan, your grandmother always said, a good name is worth more than gold. Your parents have forgotten that. They've tarnished it, and they deserve to be held accountable. Let the truth shine a light on their darkness. His conviction was a strong anchor. So, we devised a plan, a coordinated strike. Elizabeth would begin the legal filings, quietly preparing the groundwork. I would take the public stage, "We need to be strategic," Elizabeth instructed. "Don't just vent. Present the facts, the evidence, the story. Let their actions speak for themselves." I spent the next few days in a blur of emotion and strategic planning. I gathered screenshots of Ethan's extravagant lifestyle posts, juxtaposing them with the bank statements from Grandpa's folder that showed my money funding them. I meticulously documented the timeline: the fake emergency call, the immediate cancellation of my career-defining pitch, and then the devastating discovery of their bohemian vacation. I wrote and rewrote the accompanying text, channeling all my years of silent pain, all the moments of neglect, all the recent fury into clear, concise, damning prose. The language was simple, direct, just like Elizabeth had advised. No melodrama, just facts. While I was canceling a major career opportunity, rushing home because my mother faked an emergency involving my grandfather's health, my family was actually vacationing in the Bahamas. Here's the truth behind the smiles. And then the detailed account. The trust fund. The $2.5 million stolen. The systematic funneling of my inheritance into Ethan's lifestyle. The favoritism laid bare. The hypocrisy illuminated. I included blurred images of the key bank statements, enough to show the evidence without compromising the full legal case. Yet, I attached the screenshots of Ethan's opulent life juxtaposed with the corresponding withdrawals from my trust. It was terrifying. Every fiber of my being, conditioned to be quiet, to be invisible, screamed against it. But the image of my family toasting their deception on a sun-drenched beach fueled my courage. They deserved this. I deserve justice. Finally, with a deep breath and a pounding heart, I pressed post. The Instagram post went live and then I waited. The initial silence was deafening. For a few agonizing minutes, nothing happened. Had I made a mistake? Had I just destroyed my own life for nothing? Then the notifications started. First, a trickle. Likes from friends who knew something was amiss in my family, but never understood the depth. Comments from confused acquaintances. Then a cascade: shares, reshares, mentions. Within an hour, the post went viral. Not just within my small circle, but within the extended Anderson family. Cousins I hadn't spoken to in years were sharing it. Aunts and uncles, usually so quick to defend my parents, were reacting with shock and disbelief. Then it spread to their business circles. Mentions of Anderson Hotel's scandal started appearing in comments. Screenshots of my post were being shared on LinkedIn. The news outlets, always hungry for a juicy story, began to pick it up. The headline alone was enough. Financial planner alleges parents faked grandfather's emergency to steal $2.5 million trust fund. The Morgan Anderson versus Anderson Hotels narrative was quickly taking shape. My phone started ringing, vibrating nonstop. Friends, colleagues, even distant relatives all asking, "Is this true? Morgan? What is going on? Are you okay?" I ignored them all. My gaze was fixed on the screen, watching the numbers climb, watching the comments flood in. The shock, the outrage, the disbelief. It was all there. People were sharing their own stories of family betrayal, of being overlooked. The truth was out. It was messy. It was public. And it felt in a strange, exhilarating way, like freedom. My parents' spotless reputation, the carefully constructed facade they had maintained for decades, was crumbling pixel by pixel before my very eyes. The silence, the invisibility I had endured for so long, was finally shattered. And the noise. This cacophony of public exposure felt like the sweetest revenge. My phone was a hot, buzzing brick in my hand, constantly vibrating with calls, texts, and social media notifications. The storm had broken exactly as Aunt Elizabeth had predicted. My post had detonated, tearing through the carefully constructed illusion of my family's perfect image. The first calls were from confused relatives, then sympathetic friends, and finally, the enraged targets themselves. Ethan's name flashed on the screen. I almost didn't answer. But a cold curiosity, a desire to hear their reactions, made me swipe. Morgan. What the hell is wrong with you? His voice was shrill, laced with panic and fury. Take that down. You're making them look awful. What are you thinking? I took a deep breath. This was it. The direct confrontation. Making them look awful. Ethan? My voice was calm, almost unnervingly so. A stark contrast to his hysteria. They made themselves look awful when they stole my $2.5 million, used Grandpa's health as a sick excuse, and then went on a lavish vacation while I was canceling my career-defining pitch. Stole? Don't be ridiculous. He spluttered, clearly flustered. It was family money. Mom and Dad manage everything. They just invested it differently. For the family's overall benefit. For your benefit. Ethan. I corrected, a cold satisfaction spreading through me. Every car, every tuition payment, every failed startup. It was all funded by my inheritance. The money Grandma specifically set aside for my future. You know it. I know it. And now the whole world knows it. There was a moment of stunned silence on his end. He probably hadn't imagined I would have proof or the courage to expose it. You're going to ruin everything. He finally hissed, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Do you have any idea what this means for Dad? For the hotels? This is insane. Morgan. You're destroying our family. No. Ethan. I replied, the bitterness tasting like ash in my mouth. You all destroyed our family years ago. I'm just shining a light on the wreckage. I hung up before he could respond, feeling a strange mix of exhilaration and deep sadness. The family was indeed destroyed, but it wasn't by my hand. Minutes later, Mom's number appeared. Her tone was completely different from Ethan's. It was the voice of a matriarch used to getting her way, now laced with an icy fury. Morgan Anderson. What in God's name do you think you're doing? Her voice was tight, each word clipped. Delete that post immediately. You're embarrassing us. Do you know how many calls I've received? The president of the Women's Charity League just asked if the allegations were true. Your father is beside himself. Embarrassing you? I repeated, a dry laugh escaping my lips. No. Mom. You embarrassed yourselves when you used Grandpa's fake illness to ensure I wouldn't interfere with your bohemian vacation. You embarrassed yourselves when you systematically drained my trust fund to finance Ethan's lavish lifestyle. You embarrassed yourselves when you thought you could get away with it. This is ridiculous. She spat. That money was ours to manage. Ethan needed it more. You're so independent. So driven. You didn't need that silly little trust fund. Ethan. He's more delicate. He needs more support. Delicate? I scoffed. He's a grown man who's been sponging off my money for years. And you call a $2.5 million trust fund silly. That was my future. Mom. My security. My grandmother's legacy for me. You stole it. It was a temporary reallocation. She insisted, her voice rising, losing its icy control. We were going to pay it back when Ethan's businesses took off. We always intended to make it right. Really? I challenged. Because the bank statements say otherwise. The new Anderson Hotels contract, which conveniently excludes me and hands everything to Ethan, says otherwise. You had no intention of making it right. You intended to erase me completely. There was a sharp intake of breath on her end. She hadn't expected me to know about the hotel transfer. That was Elizabeth's quiet groundwork now bearing fruit. You have no idea what you're talking about, she shrieked, her composure completely shattering. You're a vengeful rote. Ungrateful child. After everything we've given you. Given me? I laughed again. A harsh, humorless sound. You gave me nothing but neglect and a stolen future? No. You embarrassed yourselves when you stole my future. And now everyone will know the truth. This is blackmail. Morgan, she cried, her voice escalating to a wail. You'll regret this. You will deeply regret this. No. Mom, I said, my voice cold and steady, the anger finally reaching a point of absolute clarity. You will. Goodbye. I ended the call, my hand still shaking. But the tremor was different now. It was no longer fear or hurt, but the lingering adrenaline of battle. The confrontations confirmed it. They were desperate, exposed, and entirely unwilling to acknowledge their wrongdoing. Their immediate reaction was to attack me, to belittle my pain, to justify their theft. There was no remorse, no apology, just outrage that their carefully constructed world was crumbling. I sat there looking out the window, a strange sense of quiet power settling over me. They had always made me feel small, invisible. But now, with the truth unleashed, I felt larger than life. I had finally found my voice, and it was echoing far and wide, shaking the very foundations of their dishonest empire. The fight was far from over, but the first decisive blow had been struck, and I knew with every fiber of my being that I would not back down. The aftermath of my Instagram post was a whirlwind of chaos and deafening silence from my immediate family. Ethan and Mom had retreated, their fury turning into what I assumed was a desperate scramble to contain the damage. Dad hadn't even bothered to call. A testament to his characteristic avoidance when things got difficult. But the rest of the world was buzzing. News outlets were running segments. Online forums were dissecting every detail. And even distant relatives were reaching out. Some in support. Others with thinly veiled warnings to think about what you're doing to your parents. But I wasn't backing down. Not now. Not after everything. Aunt Elizabeth, however, was calm amidst the storm. She called me the day after the confrontations, her voice brisk and reassuring. "Good job, Morgan. Their panic means we're on the right track. The public pressure is building just as we intended. Now for the next phase." She arranged a meeting. Not at her office this time, but at a quiet, unmarked building downtown. When I arrived, Grandpa William was already there, sitting opposite Elizabeth at a large, unassuming conference table. He looked tired, but his eyes held a spark of grim satisfaction. He offered me a small, approving smile. "Morgan," Elizabeth began, her tone serious. "Your post has done its job. It's shaken their foundation. Now we need to apply legal leverage to stop them from completing the transfer of Anderson Hotels to Ethan." She pushed a thick, bound document across the table. It was old, its pages yellowed, but meticulously preserved. The original Anderson Hotels founding contract. My great-grandfather's legacy. "Your grandmother," Elizabeth said, her voice filled with respect, "was a formidable woman. When she established this company, she insisted on certain protections, not just for her children, but for the company's integrity itself. She had a deep understanding of family dynamics, and she knew the potential for internal strife and corruption." My eyes scanned the elegant script of the old contract. It felt heavy with history, with the intentions of a woman who valued fairness and honor above all else. "Go to Section 4, subsection C," Elizabeth directed, pointing with a long, slender finger. I found it. My gaze darted across the paragraph, and then I read it again, slowly, letting the words sink in. It was a hidden clause, a provision so specific, so powerful that it felt like a bombshell waiting to detonate. Should any direct lineal heir appointed to manage or inherit a significant portion of Anderson Hotels be proven to have engaged in demonstrable acts of severe financial misconduct, dishonesty, or gross negligence that directly impacts the welfare or legitimate inheritance of another direct lineal heir of the Anderson bloodline, then and only then, control and management of the affected shares or the entirety of Anderson Hotels shall revert temporarily to the original trustee or their appointed proxy for reassessment and redistribution to uphold the principles of fairness and integrity upon which this establishment was founded. My breath hitched. Demonstrable acts of severe financial misconduct, dishonesty, impacting the legitimate inheritance of another lineal heir. The words rang in my head loud and clear. It was as if my great-grandmother from beyond the grave had foreseen precisely this scenario. She had built in a failsafe. This clause, Elizabeth explained, a triumphant gleam in her eyes, means that if we can prove your parents engaged in financial misconduct, specifically the theft of your trust fund, then their attempt to transfer Anderson Hotels to Ethan who is also an heir, becomes null and void. Control reverts to Grandpa William as the original trustee's appointed proxy after your grandmother's passing. Grandpa, who had been listening intently, nodded. I was always careful with these papers. Morgan, your grandmother made me promise to safeguard them. She knew the potential for trouble. She loved you all, but she valued honesty above all else. She wanted the company to be run with honor, not by those who would betray family for personal gain. The implications were staggering. It wasn't just about getting my money back. It wasn't just about exposing their fraud. This clause meant I had a path. A legal path to stop them from giving the entire company to Ethan. It meant I could freeze the transfer, potentially even seize control. So, with the bank statements, the trust reports, and the proof of their bohemian deception as evidence of their dishonesty and misconduct, Elizabeth continued, we have everything we need to file a formal legal injunction. It will freeze the transfer of Anderson Hotels to Ethan and force a complete review of their financial stewardship. But if control reverts to Grandpa, what then? I asked, a new kind of anxiety bubbling up. This was bigger than I had ever imagined. Grandpa William looked at me, a gentle smile spreading across his face. Then, Morgan, he said, his voice imbued with a quiet power. We make things right for the company, for the legacy, and for you. Elizabeth opened her laptop. I've already prepared the preliminary filing with your Instagram post as public evidence of the allegations and your grandfather's documentation as irrefutable proof. We have a very strong case. The court won't be able to ignore this. We'll file the injunction this afternoon. I felt a surge of adrenaline, cold and invigorating. This wasn't just revenge. This was justice. My parents had tried to erase me, to silence me, to steal my future. But they had forgotten the strength of a wrong daughter, the meticulous foresight of a wise grandmother, and the unwavering support of a loving grandfather and a formidable aunt. With Elizabeth's legal filing, we would freeze the hotel transfer to Ethan, the key to bringing their empire down, to unraveling their years of deceit, was now firmly in our grasp. The fight was about to enter its most critical phase. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't just a victim. I was a force. The legal machinery moved swiftly. Aunt Elizabeth, true to her word, filed the injunction that very afternoon. It landed like a thunderclap in the perfectly manicured world of my parents. The news of the frozen asset transfer spread like wildfire, adding fuel to the already raging fire of my Instagram post. Calls and messages from family members who had previously scoffed or offered weak defenses now shifted to panic, their loyalty wavering under the weight of legal and public scrutiny. Days later, the day of the showdown arrived. Elizabeth had received an anonymous tip, a whisper of frantic activity at my father's corporate office, the headquarters of Anderson Hotels. They're shredding documents. Morgan, she'd said, her voice sharp with urgency. They're trying to destroy evidence. We need to move now. Grandpa William, despite his age, insisted on coming. His presence, he said, was not just for support, but as the interim trustee, his authority was paramount. We arrived at the imposing glass tower that housed Anderson Hotels, an empire built by generations, now on the precipice of collapse, thanks to the greed of its current stewards. We bypassed the usual reception, Elizabeth's stern face and the accompanying uniformed federal agents clearing a path. My heart hammered against my ribs, a mixture of fear and righteous indignation. This was it. The culmination of years of silent suffering, of blatant favoritism, of outright theft. We stormed into my father's opulent office. The air was thick with the scent of ozone and burning paper. There, in the center of the room, stood my parents, rigid with panic. My father, David Anderson, usually so composed and authoritative, was frantically feeding sheets of paper into a heavy-duty shredder, his brow furrowed with desperation. My mother, Claire, was stuffing binders into large trash bags, her face pale and streaked with dust. Ethan was nowhere to be seen, likely in hiding. The shredder's mechanical growl filled the tense silence, a sound that perfectly symbolized the frantic destruction of their meticulously crafted facade. They froze, caught red-handed. Their eyes wide with shock landed on me first, then on Elizabeth, and finally on the impassive faces of the federal agents. David Anderson, Claire Anderson, one of the agents stated, his voice calm and authoritative. We have a warrant for your arrest on charges of financial fraud, embezzlement, and obstruction of justice. My mother let out a small, terrified whimper, dropping a binder that clattered loudly to the polished floor. My father's hands, still clutching a stack of papers, trembled visibly. What? What is the meaning of this? My father stammered, trying to regain some semblance of control. But his voice cracked. Elizabeth stepped forward, her presence commanding. It means, David, Claire, that your time of deception is over. You've been caught attempting to destroy evidence of your fraud against Morgan and against the Anderson Hotels Trust. I walked over to the shredder, its hungry mouth still humming, and pulled out a half-shredded document. It was a fragment of a bank statement, clearly showing a large withdrawal. Trying to make your problems disappear? I asked, my voice steady, devoid of the emotion that raged within me. Just like you tried to make my inheritance disappear. Just like you tried to make me disappear. My mother's eyes, usually so dismissive and cold towards me, were now filled with terror. She looked at me as if she was seeing a stranger, not her daughter. Morgan, please, she begged, her voice raw. Don't do this. We can fix this. We can talk. Talk? I scoffed, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. We had years to talk. Mom. Years for you to be honest. Years for you to make things right. Instead, you stole from me. You manipulated Grandpa. You actively plotted to cut me out of my own family's legacy. There's nothing left to talk about. I held up the original Anderson Hotels contract, the clause highlighted, then the folder filled with the bank records and trust reports. This I said. Addressing the agents. Is the proof. Years of systematic theft. Funneling $2.5 million of my inheritance into Ethan's accounts. This violates the trust agreement and the core principles of the Anderson Hotel's founding contract. Grandpa William stepped forward, his gaze firm, meeting my parents' pleading eyes without flinching. Your grandmother built this company on integrity. David, you've defiled her legacy. As the acting trustee, I cannot allow this to continue. The federal agents moved in, their movements swift and practiced. They began to cuff my parents, reading them their rights. My mother let out a strangled sob as the cold metal clicked around her wrists. My father, his face pale and defeated, offered no resistance. As they were led away, my mother turned her head, her eyes locking onto mine, a mix of furious resentment and broken despair. You ruined us, Morgan, she whispered, her voice venomous, even as she was escorted out of her husband's office, out of the life she knew. No, Mom, I replied, my voice clear and strong, meeting her gaze head-on. You ruined yourselves. I just made sure everyone knew. The door swung shut behind them, leaving only the hum of the shredder, now silent, and the echoes of a broken family. Ethan, the golden child, was nowhere to be found. His empire, built on my stolen inheritance, was exposed and left in ruins. My parents, the architects of my pain, were facing the consequences of their deceit. I stood there amidst the wreckage of their lies, a strange sense of emptiness mixing with a profound feeling of justice. It wasn't the triumphant roar I had imagined, but a quiet, powerful knowing. The silence was no longer heavy with my invisibility, but with the undeniable weight of truth. The battle was won. The legal proceedings that followed were a blur of courtrooms, documents, and public scrutiny. Aunt Elizabeth was a relentless force, meticulously presenting the evidence, dismantling every attempt by my parents' lawyers to discredit me or downplay their actions. The proof from Grandpa's folder, combined with their desperate attempt to shred documents, was undeniable. The fraud was blatant, the betrayal clear. In the end, the court delivered its verdict. My parents were found guilty of financial fraud and embezzlement. While they avoided lengthy prison sentences due to my mother's health and their lack of prior criminal records, they faced significant fines and restitution orders. More importantly, the court awarded me full ownership of Anderson Hotels. The original Anderson Hotels contract clause, skillfully leveraged by Aunt Elizabeth, was upheld. The company meant for Ethan was now mine. My parents were stripped of all control and any financial interest in the company. Ethan was left exposed, his lifestyle abruptly cut off, his future no longer subsidized by my stolen inheritance. He was, as Aunt Elizabeth succinctly put it, penniless and directionless. The news sent shockwaves through the business community and the Anderson family. The headlines screamed, "Daughter takes over Anderson Hotels after parents' fraud conviction." It wasn't the vindictive triumph I might have craved in my darkest moments, but a quiet, profound victory of justice. Taking over Anderson Hotels was a monumental task. The company, under my parents' stewardship, had become bloated, inefficient, and riddled with hidden debts and questionable accounting practices. The initial months were a brutal education in corporate restructuring. I worked tirelessly, fueled by a fierce determination to rebuild it, not just for myself, but for the legacy my great-grandmother had envisioned. I approached the task with transparency, equality sorely lacking in my parents' management. I prioritized paying off old debts, ensuring fair wages for all employees, and implementing strict ethical guidelines. I established scholarship programs for hospitality students, a direct echo of the educational opportunities I had been denied. I focused on innovation, on customer experience, on making Anderson Hotels a name synonymous with integrity and excellence. Once again, it was exhausting, exhilarating work. And for the first time, I felt truly empowered, truly seen. Months turned into a year. The company slowly, steadily began to thrive under my leadership. The Anderson Hotels brand, once tarnished by scandal, was now associated with a story of redemption, of a daughter rebuilding what her parents had nearly destroyed. One crisp autumn evening, I found myself on the rooftop of the flagship Anderson Hotel in downtown Atlanta. The city lights twinkled below, a vibrant tapestry stretching into the horizon. Grandpa William stood beside me, his arm linked through mine. A comfortable silence settling between us. He had been my steadfast supporter through it all, attending every court date, offering quiet wisdom and unwavering belief. "It's beautiful, Morgan," he said, his voice soft, gazing out at the city. "Your great-grandmother would be so proud." I leaned my head on his shoulder, taking in the panoramic view. The pain of my past was still there, a faint scar on my heart, but it no longer defined me. The anger had mellowed into a quiet strength, the hurt into profound resilience. "They tried to erase you, Morgan," Grandpa said, his voice thoughtful. "They tried to make you invisible, to steal your future, to deny your worth. But you didn't let them. You turned their lies into your strength. You took their betrayal and built something new, something honest, something truly yours." I smiled. A genuine, peaceful smile. He was right. They had tried to cut me out. But in doing so, they had unwittingly given me the tools to carve out my own path. A path far grander and more fulfilling than anything they would have ever allowed. I had found my voice, asserted my worth, and built an empire. Not out of greed, but out of resilience and a quest for justice. The quiet, invisible daughter had finally stepped into the light, shining brighter than any golden child. I took a deep breath, the cool night air filling my lungs. The weight of the world, once so heavy with their expectations and their neglect, now felt light, brimming with possibility. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about peace. It was about creating a legacy of my own, built on honesty and hard work. It was about turning a deep wound into a source of undeniable power. If this story touched you, or if you've ever been cut out or underestimated. Please share your story below. It would mean a lot if you'd subscribe to the channel and share this video to help me grow better and bring you more stories of betrayal, justice, and quiet revenge.